welcome this evening. First, it's my job to ask you to all turn off your trios, okay? And anybody else who has one of those old-fashioned cell phones can turn it off too. I feel very privileged this evening to introduce this particular panel, since I was there for the Macintosh launch and really was one of the thrills of my professional career. I have to say, I can't believe it was really 20 years ago. Is that right? That just doesn't seem possible. And I could tell you stories, but I won't, since I'm not on the panel. But what I am going to do is just spend a couple minutes telling you about the museum. So for those of you who have been before, I ask your indulgence in letting me take this time to tell the others a little bit about this institution. First, it started with the Boston Computer Museum, who you may know as the host of the Computer Bowl. And Gordon and Gwen Bell and Len Shustik tried to establish a strong history center as a part of that institution, and ended up deciding that it really needed its own institution. Took the collection from the Boston Computer Museum out here, started a whole separate institution to celebrate computer history. So in 1999 it became an independent museum. You may have noticed it's not really a museum yet. We call it a museum. What is it? It is, first of all, a collection. It is, in fact, the world's most significant collection of computing artifacts. That's hardware, software, videos, photos, mugs, T-shirts, buttons, and so on. It's also, and collecting is really at our heart. That's the most important thing we do. It's an institution with over 15 full-time staff, legions of volunteers. We have lots of programs, this tremendously successful speaker series, our Fellows program where we honor computing pioneers, and you'll see their pictures out in the foyer here. We do restoration programs on machines. We do retrospectives of companies. We've done DEC, Apple Lore. I think a few of you were here for Apple Lore, Ethernet. We provide support for research, both patent research, academic research. We have this building, almost 120,000 square feet, and eventually we will have world-class exhibits. And that is the one thing that is different than what you think of today as a museum. We're not there yet, but we do have a vision that extends out to world-class exhibits with multimedia, fully curated, and so on. We do have visible storage downstairs, so hopefully you've seen that. So why have a museum? Is this just geek nostalgia? Well, I think that there's a couple reasons that we think it's important to have a museum. First, the computer is one of the most important inventions in history. It's hard to think of anything else that has had the impact that this has had. And we've lived through it, and now is the opportunity to collect the artifacts from it. Secondly, it's an inspiration to youth. I think our youth have lots of sports heroes, rock heroes, music heroes, but one of the goals I have for this institution is to make heroes out of the engineers and inventors and entrepreneurs as well. There is no other museum like us in the world, believe it or not. You know there's lots of aviation museums, sports museums, quilt museums, all sorts of museums. There is only one computer history museum. So my job is to ask you to help us. Please join at a membership level that's a high membership level and support us in the annual level. Volunteer your time. Come to these lectures. Attend the Fellows Dinner in the fall. That's a great event. Tell your friends. A lot of people still don't know about us. Check your basements and your garages for artifacts. I want to show you what Barb Colkin Barza brought in today in terms of artifacts. Let's see if you know what this is. Hang on. Now, don't you think that's an important artifact worth preserving for the museum?
Yeah. One of the most important. Absolutely.
And, of course, as the chair of the Major Gift Campaign, I would be remiss if I did not mention our capital campaign that will pay for this building and those world-class exhibits. So we'd love an opportunity to talk with you more about that. So that's my pitch, and I'm going to move on to the program now. And the real pleasure I have of introducing Mike Murray, who I worked with back in those days. So it's a delight for me to be able to do this. Mike Murray is chairman and co-founder of Unite Us, a nonprofit venture capital organization for the microfinance industry. Unite Us provides capital and consulting support to help partner organizations accelerate their microcredit loan programs in the poorest areas of the world. Mike spent 20 years as an executive in the personal computer industry. In the early 80s, he led the introduction and all marketing activities for the Macintosh. That's what you're going to hear about tonight. In the mid-80s, he was involved in high-tech mergers and acquisitions. He came to Microsoft in 1989 to run the company's networking software business. Oh, come on. Get over it. Come on. He became Microsoft's first VP of Human Resources and Administration, a position he held until his departure in 1999. Mike holds an engineering degree and an MBA, both from Stanford University. He's an active philanthropist, a leader in his church, a raiser of cattle, and a fly fisherman. And what I'm going to close with before I turn it over to Mike is a little story that he told me about how he started at Apple. And I love this story, so I have to read it to you. It's Mike's words. I was hired by Steve Jobs in February 1982 to work in the Mac marketing group. The entire Macintosh team, hardware engineers, software designers, etc., consisted of 18 people. The marketing effort was being led on a part-time basis by Barry Cash, a former Mostech executive from Texas. Shortly after my arrival, Barry decided to move back to Texas to be closer to his family. Steve, you know which Steve that is, sent out the following memo. Barry Cash has decided to go back to Texas. Until we can find someone great to replace him, Mike Murray will be the acting marketing director. With that, I introduce to you Mike Murray.
Hey, Shire, he was the Paul Bremer of marketing.
Good evening. I'm your acting host for tonight. And I will act like one. You know, I think I'm probably the only person in the entire computer industry who's had the distinct pleasure of working directly for, at one time or another, Steve Jobs, Steve Ballmer, and Bill Gates. I used to be about 6'4". Luckily, I've left that industry. Perhaps some of you, before you came here tonight, were reviewing this old copy of Business Week. I do quite often. It's the October 3rd, 1983 version, and if you can't see it, the cover says, Personal Computers, and the winner is, you know who, IBM. This was in October of 1983. The Macintosh was scheduled to come out in January of 1984. The world had already voted and decided that IBM and any such things as clones that might come from that, that was the de facto winner. So we might as well roll up the sidewalks, turn off the lights, and go home. We are racing towards the finish line to get the Mac done and to get it launched. 2 weeks after that cover story came out, Apple held its annual sales meeting in Hawaii, and the sales force was in for a treat. And in that sales meeting, Steve Jobs stood up, and let's see what he said. October 23rd, 1983. Can we bring down the lights?
It's a catchy tune. Don't you like it? Catchy.
Hi, I'm Steve Jobs. It is 1958. IBM passes up the chance to buy a young fledgling company that has invented a new technology called xerography. 2 years later, Xerox is born, and IBM has been kicking themselves ever since. It is 10 years later, the late 60s. Digital Equipment, DEC, and others invent the mini-computer. IBM dismisses the mini-computer as too small to do serious computing, and therefore unimportant to their business. DEC grows to become a multi-hundred-million-dollar corporation before IBM finally enters the mini-computer market. It is now 10 years later, the late 70s. In 1977, Apple, a young, fledgling company on the West Coast, invents the Apple II, the first personal computer as we know it today. IBM dismisses the personal computer as too small to do serious computing. and unimportant to their business. The early 80s. 81. Apple II has become the world's most popular computer, and Apple has grown to a $300 million company, becoming the fastest growing corporation in American business history. With over 50 competitors vying for a share, IBM enters the personal computer market in November 81 with the IBM PC. 1983. Apple and IBM emerge as the industry's strongest competitors, each selling approximately $1 billion worth of personal computers in 1983. Each will invest greater than $50 million for R&D and another $50 million for television advertising in 1984, totaling almost $250 million combined. The shakeout is in full swing. The first major firm goes bankrupt, with others teetering on the brink. Total industry losses for 83 outshadow even the combined profits of Apple and IBM for personal computers. It is now 1984. It appears IBM wants it all. Apple is perceived to be the only hope to offer IBM a run for its money. Dealers, initially welcoming IBM with open arms, now fear an IBM-dominated and controlled future. They are increasingly and desperately turning back to Apple as the only force that can ensure their future freedom. IBM wants it all and is aiming its guns on its last obstacle to industry control, Apple. Will Big Blue dominate the entire computer industry? The entire information age? Was George Orwell right about 1984?
For today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the Information Purification Directives. We have created, for the first time in all history, a garden of pure ideology, where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests of vague contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
That sets the stage. And I think it's really a bit overwhelming for those of us up here on the stage tonight to see that all of you would want to come and hear a little bit about what was going on in our minds back then. Unfortunately, we really can't remember anything. So that's why we entitled this Fact and Fiction, and we'll let the audience decide. What I'd like to do first is have our panelists introduce themselves, and I'd like you to say who you are, tell us when you joined the Mac group, and very, very briefly how you got there, like not bus or car, but what you were doing, what you were doing immediately before that, because we ended up being such an eclectic group in terms of the whole organization. So, Mike, why don't you start?
I'm Mike Boych. I was the original software evangelist for the Macintosh group. Okay, contrary to what you might
Yeah, I was
think.
going to say.
The guy's book.
Wait a minute. I never said I was the original.
No,
I said I did the work.
Okay, all right. That's true. But
that is the first fact of the night. Yes.
and,
Exactly.
so I actually, after various misadventures that had nothing to do with computing, graduated from business school and went to work for Hewlett Packard in Corvallis, Oregon. And the other bright young MBA across the hall was Mike Murray. And he left, I think, because he mentioned he joined Apple in February 1982. And that was really where I preferred to be. And in March of 1982, as fate would have it, I joined Apple. I got a call from Mike saying they need somebody that sounds like you, who loves computing and software and wants to be involved in the Macintosh project. So that's how I got there.
Yeah, actually, I got fired by HP because I said I was going to go to work for Apple, and they escorted me out of the company, which is with security guards, which is an un-HP kind of thing to do. And they literally walked me out with these two husky guys and put me in my car, and I said, but what about the stuff on my desk?
Yeah.
And they said, we'd send it to you, and I needed my calendar book. So I get down to Cupertino, and I called Mike, and I said, could you please send me the book? And he says, I'll deliver it for you.
Yeah.
And he flew down and never came back. Joanna.
Let's see.
Who are you?
I'm Joanna Hoffman. I joined the Macintosh group in October of 1980. And I was hired actually by Jeff Raskin, who had started the project. And one of the prerequisites for the job was actually being a music lover, because Jeff was very musical, and part of the interview was recognizing the different musical styles that he improvised on the piano in his house as I was being interviewed. So that was my eclectic beginning on the Macintosh project. And shortly after I joined, the Mac project got taken over by Steve Jobs, actually just two months after I joined. And how I got there. Boy, that's way back when. I was actually an archaeologist before then. And the way I got there is that the Iranian Revolution happened, and all the archaeology in that area dried up. So, thought from the past, let's just dive into the future. Why not?
Great. Steve.
By bus. Yeah.
By bus.
No, I joined
This
Apple
is Steve Shire.
in late '82. I was first started working there on a project called Kids Can't Wait. And and I worked a lot with Jobs during that period of time. And then he called me and said, I'd like you to come over and think about being the product introduction manager for Macintosh. And I know that Steve had been out in the company talking to various people out doing. He talked to Z about it, I think. He talked to Donna about it. And he was really distressed, like Mike, that he couldn't get somebody great to do it. And he said, he finally agreed that I would do it. And he said, well, you weren't my first choice. I said, that's true, but I'm the only one who's willing to do it. So that's how I got in. And I think I interviewed like 11 people in one day, and that was it.
Great. Andy, who are you?
I'm Andy Cunningham, and I didn't work for Apple. I worked for Regis McKenna, and I think Regis may be out there. But anyway, I came to work he might be, maybe not. Anyway, I came to work in 1983 to Regis McKenna, and I was offered a position by Regis to work on the launch of the Macintosh. I came from Chicago. I had no idea what that was. I came from a very big agency called Burson Marsteller. I worked on the Equal and NutraSuite launch before I got there. I come out there, and Regis says to me, well, we're not a very big agency, and we don't have a library. Are you okay with that? And I said, yeah, I'm fine with it. He goes, well, we don't have any other resources either. And here's your team. And Jane Anderson was the whole team. So Jane and I basically got to work on the development of the PR launch plan for the Macintosh. And I remember we went in to present it to you, Mike, and maybe a couple of other people. We worked with Larry Tesler helped us. Larry Tesler helped us with Lisa Project, which is the application Jane and I wrote this launch plan on, believe it or not. And we went in to present it to Mike. And we presented a budget. It's just me and Jane, mind you. This is 1983. We present a budget of $500,000 to do this launch over the course of 9 months or so. There's no way on God's green earth Jane and I could have billed $500,000 worth of money. Mike says to us, that's great. Do you need more money?
You have to humiliate him now, 20 years later?
Still waiting for the kickback.
Yeah.
The man who needs no introduction. Okay, thank you. Well, back to the questions.
My name is Guy Kawasaki, and I am Apple's second software evangelist. The true history is that Mike was the first one, and I was the second one, and Alan Rossman did all the work. But I took all the credit, and that's kind of the positioning of the three first generations of evangelists at Apple. My job was to convince Macintosh software developers to write Macintosh versions of their product for a machine that at the time didn't even have a compiler. I started in September of '83, and I was hired really, my sole qualification was that I knew Mike Boych at Stanford and, introduced him to women from Hawaii. And so
How'd that go?
Well, that's another story.
Okay.
And my real first job at Apple was basically to carry Mike's bag as we went around the country and demonstrated Macintosh. Right, Mike?
That's the way I remember it.
That's the way I remember it.
We also have in the audience a number of people who are involved in the early development of the Mac. And if you're comfortable doing this, I'd love for you to stand up and just turn around and introduce yourself and say what your role was in the project. You don't need to spend quite as much time as our panel did. But and the rules are you had to have been on the Mac project sometime before and up to January 24, 1984. Right. Daniel, we'll start with you since I know you'll stand up for us.
All right. My name's Daniel Lewin. I was on the team. Joanna recruited me to the team, and I set up the business for the universities and a few other little things. As opposed to an evangelist, I was an opportunist.
I'm Barbara Culkin, or I was Barbara Culkin back then, and Mike recruited me, and Bob Belvin, who was the original engineering manager. I worked at Xerox with Bob and came over to be the first product marketing manager for the Macintosh.
I thought you were the person swinging the sledgehammer on the TV all this time.
I wish I was the person.
So I'm Martin Haberly. I joined the team in March of '82. I did chip design, led the chip design team for the Mac. I did the memory allocator for the Mac ROMs with a little bit of help from Larry Kenyon. Mike Boych and I wrote the first great terminal emulator software application for the Mac Terminal, and it was a kick.
Thanks, Martin.
Hi, Mike. I'm Chris Espinosa. I worked for Mike. I joined the Macintosh team in September of 1981. I was a sophomore in college and had been working at Apple since the garage in 1976. Steve Jobs called me up in summer of 1981 and said, I want you to come be the publications and training manager of this new project. It'll only take a year, and I'll pay your college expenses when we send you back to college. I haven't been back to college.
I'm Brian Stearns. I worked on Mac between mid-'82 and mid-'83 on Macintosh Basic.
I'm John Zeisler. I was in the sales department at Apple, and I helped run the dealer channel and launch Macintosh into the retail channel segment. I joined Apple in 1980. My car got stolen, and I took the insurance check and bought an Apple II instead, and that led me into Apple.
There you go.
I'm Mary Ellen McCammon, and I started at Apple in '81 in human resources and was whisked away to the special projects group before they were known as Macintosh. I hired all these guys. And then I went over to marketing because Mike Murray was not the greatest, but he was the most fun marketing director around.
Joined in the summer of '83 and worked with Z and his crew to help make sure that we got the Mac into the dealer channel. That was my first thing at Apple. It was a good time.
My name is Paul Cahoon. I did not work for Apple. I worked for Chiat Day. I joined Chiat Day in early 1983 as we struggled through trying to figure out who this Apple computer client was. And I had the great fortune of working with Mike and deeply involved in the 1984 commercial that was shot over in London. And the rest, as they say, is history. Mike, good to see you again.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Bill Waffen. I was Mike's finance guy, and I was Guy's finance guy, and I was Shire's finance guy.
Is that you?
So if you weren't in engineering, I was your finance guy, and if you were in engineering, I did your taxes. And if you were at Shia Day, I was the one who stood up and said, "Yeah, we have the money for that ad." So it was a great fun working there. And before that, I was in Chicago at a bank at a desk, having made a mistake, and was waiting to get promoted to be at another desk and another desk. But you'd always look at the wall, so you never got to look out the window. So got a window, Mac.
Hi, I'm Andy Hertzfeld. I started at Apple I started August '79. I started in the Mac February '81 and worked with all these people I'm sitting near. So I'll give it to Bruce.
I'm Bruce Horn. I started in December '81. I was privileged to work with Andy and Larry and Patty and a bunch of incredible people. Wrote the Finder with Steve Capps and came from Xerox PARC to have probably one of the most incredible experiences of my life. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Larry Kenyon, and I was one of the software people responsible to, and I worked with Andy on Apple II cards actually before he got me to come over to the Mac group, which is cool. Where I met my wife.
Hi, I'm Patty Kenyon, and I was Patty Kingman, and I was their software librarian and got to work with all these great guys, and best time of my life for sure.
Hi, I'm Ron Nicholson. I joined the Mac team in '82 to work with Wendell Sander on the original disk controller for the Macintosh.
Oh my God.
Kotke.
Hi, I'm Dan Kotke. I joined the Mac group right about the same time Andy did. I thought it was January of '80. I was the number 2 digital engineer working with Burl. Where's Burl? He's not here. Anyway, Burl had a pretty good grasp on the digital design, but to the extent he let me work with him, I was honored to bring to life all the prototypes, which was, a great point in my career. Thanks.
Okay, that's the fact. Is there Jane Anderson?
Jane.
Oh,
yes,
great.
Jane.
I'm Jane Anderson, and I had the privilege to work with Andy and the rest of the team from Regis McKenna.
Great. Now that's the fact. Now, are there any of you who've been telling your kids for the last 20 years that you worked on the Mac team and would like to stand up and tell us about it? All right. Let's get into some questions for our panel. First one is, when did you realize that you were involved in something that really was going to change the world?
Are you going to answer any of these questions, or are you just going to pose them? That's what I want to know.
I'm a poser.
You're a poser. Okay.
I may have a few answers. Whoever would like
I'll
to
just
go.
do a brief answer to that. When Steve told us.
The day you started then. Any thoughts on that, Mike?
Well, I guess we talked about how we got there, but so the other part of it was, I was kind of trying to insinuate myself into this job, and I got a call saying, come down, I guess, because I was living in Oregon, to Cupertino. I had dinner with this guy, this mysterious Texan named Barry Cash, and then I came back a week later and had dinner with Steve at the Good Earth, which is a very interesting interview where Steve said, it's kind of a marketing position, but you have to work with software developers. And he said, "Are you technical?" And of course I said, "Yes, why not?" And he said, anyway, he asked me a lot of very obscure questions, and I got a couple of them right. So I came back the next day, and the interview lineup was Joanna, I think Andy Hertzfeld, Burl Smith, who I later co-founded Radius with, who's not here tonight, Rod Holt, And you just couldn't meet a more amazing group of people, none of whom was quite like anybody else that you'd ever met. I was at Hewlett-Packard, which is a very respectable company, but I just never met a group of people like this. And there was just nobody who wasn't
different.
Different, better than different though. Just amazing people who just had so much passion and so much instinct about what to do beyond what had been done to date. So, I mean, I knew right away that for free or under any circumstances, I just wanted to be there, just to be part of it. So, I guess I knew during the job interview.
There was certainly the reality distortion field that went on, but was there a time when some of the rest of you thought that we may really be doing something special here? In addition to just being told that we were, that you really sensed something magical happening?
Well, we were told, and that was enough. No, I mean, you could tell there were people who were very energetic. They were very excited about what they're doing. They felt tremendous passion about what they were doing and tremendous pride. That was something you saw right away. I mean, I was, came from the not too cool Apple II group. The only cool person there was Sue Espinosa, as far as I was concerned, pretty much. And you came over there, and you were part of a special band of people who were trying to do something incredible, and you saw the product. The product was breathtaking. When you look at graphic user interface now, it's like, it's so common, but back then it was something truly distinct and truly unbelievable. And you just saw how people were really incredibly committed, and you saw that people were willing to do virtually anything to make it, great. And you don't see that often.
Yeah, for me, it was, I think all credit should go probably to Andy Hertzfeld, because I think Andy wrote the Pepsi caps, bouncing caps. And when I saw that program, to use a religious analogy, the scales were removed from my eyes. When I saw caps bouncing in a window, I said, this is it. This is the future. And that was it. I was like that. I was gone.
Guy's always been an easy mark.
Yeah. Takes one to know one.
Yeah. So the other story to tell about Guy's recruitment was...
are we not just going to go to stories?
Guy came up from Los Angeles for this company he was working at, and we interviewed him. The Mac team interviewed him, and then Steve Jobs came and interviewed him. And Steve said to Mike Murray and me, well, he doesn't have that much relevant experience. He seems like a good guy. If you guys want to bet your jobs, I'll hire him. He went back to L.A., and it was a year later that we actually hired him.
Right. You're going to bet your jobs. Yeah.
I would say that for me it was when Andy joined the team, because it was a major turning point. I knew the hardware was something amazing, because Burl had an idea every 10 seconds basically, and was metamorphosing the product based on the latest and the greatest he had in mind. But when Andy joined the team, that's when things really started to come together and became the software, the soul of the machine started to take shape. And I think for me, that's when I knew that it was going to be amazing.
I think for me, as we watched this commercial here, I loved the product, and that's why I joined the group. And working for HP at the time was kind of like working for the Rotary Club. It was a group of really, really nice, polite people, but the products were rather ho-hum. So this was extremely exciting, but there were a lot of significant marketing challenges, and notwithstanding the drama behind the way Steve Jobs set up that commercial, there wasn't a lot out there in the marketplace that suggested that the Macintosh would succeed. The Lisa, which had come out in January of 1983, was pretty much a financial failure and was not selling in the volumes that the company needed by the fall of '83. So so could we do it with a smaller box, with an improved user interface and so forth? So what I think got me was at the very end of that, when we showed the ad in Hawaii, I don't know if you noticed at the very end, but Steve, just for like 2 seconds, goes like this. And what he's doing is, I'm sitting down in the front row of the sales meeting. I'm kind of sitting right about where you are. And we looked at each other, and we realized this extraordinary emotional reaction that a sales force, now you pay a sales force and you load them up with booze and stuff, but
Which happened quite liberally.
it wasn't really an objective test, but we were looking for any indication of potential success. And you couldn't tell from watching the video here how that conference hall in the hotel in Hawaii was almost lifted up in terms of the just raw emotion that came out. So what he's doing is looking down at me, and we're both going like this, saying, we truly think we have it. And we think there's enough energy here that goes beyond a great computer. There's something more at stake, and let's go see if we can do it. And that's the point where I thought, well, I think we really can. That was very exciting for me. Let's move to some anecdotal stories. What are some stories that you have that kind of tell what was going on during that period of time? Either inside or out on the road. They can be funny stories. They can be not so funny stories. They can just kind of tell what it was like during that period of time from 83, 80, getting it out in 84, 82, and so forth, that would help the audience here sense what we were all doing. Any anecdotes? Joanna?
Well, actually, something came to my mind as I was watching this tape that you showed behind us. And that was when, you may remember this, Mike, we were actually in the offices of Regis McKenna. And this was, I think, one of the first meetings we had about the positioning of the Macintosh and how it was going to come out. And what we were going to, we had meetings before, silly meetings like, these classical marketing meetings. If the Macintosh were a car, what kind of car would it be? And of course, everybody started screaming their own car model, and BMW, like Honda Civic. Anyway, but this was actually a meeting full of content, which is unusual for marketing.
At a PR agency, I want to note.
Yeah, right, really.
But and one of the things that Regis asked us was, well, what is the competition for the Macintosh? And at that time, there was the Osborn was out, the DEC had some
Rainbow
machine out there. Xerox had, much to the dismay of the Xerox PARC crowd, a really junky piece of shit out. And so, so we started listing all of these machines because this was just what was out there. And so the list, as we were yelling things out, were just going on. And at that point, Regis stopped us. And he got up and he said, you have only one competitor, and that is IBM. And all of a sudden, there was this hush in the room because from a marketing point of view, it kind of crystallized immediately what it was that we were going to be doing. We were going to set ourselves against this enormous giant, and it was going to be us or them, or us and them, and everybody else was going to fall by the wayside. And that's exactly what happened. But that was the first time, I think, that it was Regis who just kind of, put the stake in the ground.
Memory I have of Steve Jobs came in after a weekend, and he had this little newspaper clipping, and it was a story about how George Lucas, who was doing the Star Wars movies then, I think maybe the first one had just come out, how he had co-opted all of us. And he'd worked behind the scenes before the movie came out in creating toys and T-shirts and posters and so forth, and all of this was done in advance of a movie, which had never been done before, so that when the movie came out and all this paraphernalia entered the marketplace, we all would think that Star Wars was a happening. And we'd want to jump in and be involved in it because we wouldn't want to be stuck behind. And I remember Steve saying, we need to do this for the Mac. And that became a lot of the driving forces behind our thinking of how we would bring the Mac to market, not just with one commercial, but with all kinds of other things going on underground, so that when the Mac came out in January of '84, the hope would be many normal people would look up and say, whoa, where'd this come from? How come I didn't know about it? And people who have a desire to be in the know would need to know, so it would propel them to move forward. And that included Daniel Lewin's work on the University Consortium, Mike's work and Guy's work on the on software evangelism. We needed a magazine, and I think I brought a copy. And nothing like a good objective magazine that tells your product. and this was but who would pay for ads in a magazine for a product that's not selling yet and doesn't exist? So we found a publisher who, through the benevolence of their heart, would agree to publish a magazine under their name if we would completely underwrite it. Which we did.
Yep.
So I think it was for the first 12 months.
Oh yeah, I worked on that deal, and it was they were laughing all the way to the bank. Let me tell you, but they did do that. It was at least 12 months. Yeah.
So we guaranteed a certain circulation. We paid for the paper. We paid for the ads. But it was now, trust me with this. It was a completely independent magazine.
The only thing I didn't like is they wanted me to deliver them, and I thought that was a bit much.
So when you went out onto the street and you saw the Mac come out to the marketplace, here would be this magazine talking about it. There were probably a dozen other such things that we did in the George Lucas idea, so that you all thought that this was a happening event, and we would try to co-opt your point of view on that.
So, so far tonight, I've heard a devout Mormon say that you can buy the press and you should give Salesforce booze.
And it's only 7:45.
We're just speaking truth here tonight.
Okay. All right. Just want to point that out.
Other stories fun stories that come to mind.
God, I've got so many. One of my favorite ones is about Guy, of course, because God, don't be so shy. I had this. Mike pulled me aside. Steve, I need you to come to a meeting right now. About what, Mike? Well, we got to talk to Guy. It's like, about what? Just come to the meeting. And I go there and I find Barnes. I find Susan Barnes and Debbie Coleman in the room. And the reason we're all in the room is that they're about ready to kill Guy because he spent $750,000 on stuff that he wasn't supposed to spend.
It was $745,000.
Oh, okay, fine. It was $745,000. Now, there is a moral to the story. The moral to the story
was okay.
Yeah. That's not what he was saying that day, I can tell you. So it was $745,000. He had no authorization to spend it, but he was right. And that's another thing I liked about this group, which is that he had absolutely no authorization, but he knew it was the right thing to do, and he just did it. And so what did he do? He sent out software to every dealer in North America, right? So you had to, buy it.
Murray told me to do it.
Oh, yeah, well, I don't think you have plausible deniability there.
The My Lai Massacre defense. My superior told me to do it.
So,
Mike, you should tell the story of Adam Osborn dropping the Osborn.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
So, actually, it wasn't Adam Osborn. So this just came up because we were down in the viewable storage checking out the artifacts, and there was an Osborn 1 there, which is a little bit bigger and heavier than you. It was the first transportable computer, weighed about 40 pounds, and it was some sort of very hard fiberglass case. So in February of 1985, right after the Macintosh was introduced, was the first and maybe only SoftCon. It was the first sort of all-software trade show. And we went to that, and of course we took our Macs, and we liked to demonstrate that the Mac was transportable, so we had it in a little canvas carrying bag. When I got on the airliner to fly home, I looked above my seat in the overhead storage, and that was full. So I looked in the overhead storage behind my seat, and when I just pried the door open ever so slightly, this Osborn computer came flying out, and it struck the woman who was sitting in the seat there. Just kind of a glancing blow on the shoulder, but it looked like it was pretty painful. And then I looked across the aisle, and there was this little guy there with a little, mustache, and it was Adam Osborn. And he said to me, "You shouldn't blame yourself entirely." And I'm not sure what it proves about the Macintosh, but it was an interesting moment in my life. And, the other one I remember fondly is going with Daniel and Steve and Andy Hertzfeld to Brown University and visiting Andy Van Dam, who was the chairman of the computer science department at Brown. We showed him the Mac, which was just always, that was the great thing about my job, is when the Mac was top secret, I got to take it out in this little case and ideally get an NDA signed and then show it to people who'd never, in this case, they'd seen graphical user interface before, but they were always amazed at this little box that could do so much. And So Andy Van Dam, of course, didn't want to be overly impressed, and so he said, well, it's nice, Steve, but we're really waiting for the 3M machine, which is going to have a megapixel and a megabyte of RAM and a megaflop. And Steve goes, well, we believe in that too. By the way, what's a megaflop?
I want to tell us a story that Barbara actually reminded me of when we were doing, I think it was the Fortune photo shoot at the Carlisle Hotel, and Steve always had to stay at the Carlisle. And so we get there around 10 o'clock at night, and Barbara was there, and I was there, and another woman that worked with us, Katie Cadigan, was also there. And as soon as you arrived at a hotel with Steve, you began the process of rearranging the room, because he didn't like the way anything was. So we had to rearrange all the furniture, and we had to bring in a piano, because he had to have he doesn't play the piano. Yeah, I know, this is kind of...
Put it down here, is that better?
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, guys. Anyway, so we brought a piano in, and as I pointed out, Steve does not play the piano, but there was always a piano in every location where he was. And he insisted right away that there be a giant bowl of strawberries in the room. Remember this, Jane? A giant bowl of strawberries and a big vase full of this certain kind of flower that Steve could not describe. So,
that's what made it so special.
Being the Mac flack that I was, I had to be the person to get this stuff. So we finally were able to get the hotel to deliver us a $75 bowl of strawberries that night. So we got the strawberries, and it had to have cream, but the cream had to be next to the strawberries. It couldn't be anywhere touching the strawberries. So we got that. But the problem that I had with Steve was these flowers. He insisted they were some other kind of flower, and I knew what he was talking about was a calla lily, which is this sort of green stemmed thing with a white, and we had a fight. He and I had a fight over what kind of flower this was that he wanted me to order. Now it's midnight in New York in the wintertime, and I'm supposed to order fresh calla lilies for this room. Well, as it turns out, it's not possible to get fresh calla lilies in New York at midnight in the middle of winter. So we faked it with some other kind of flower, and it turned out that it was okay. But so at about 1 or 2 in the morning, the room was all set for Steve. We show up at 8 o'clock in the morning the next day to do the photo thing. And this was in the days when Michael Jackson was actually cool. And, and Steve was just taken with Michael Jackson, just taken with him. And this one song, Billie Jean, he was absolutely in love with. And that was in the days also when tape recorders were these big things like this. And he insisted that the only way that he would pose for this photographer, and if you know Steve, you know that he hates having his picture taken and does not cooperate with photographers at all. But the only time he would actually cooperate with this photo shoot happening at the Carlisle with his strawberries and his lilies and everything else all around was when the song Billie Jean was on the tape. So here I am, they're pushing the play button, letting the photographer have 3 minutes of photos, and Steve is being all smiley and all wonderful, and then the song is over with, and then he becomes what he becomes. And so I'm rewinding. Get it back on, start it out, play again. He's all nice again, and then we end it.
It was frightening, wasn't it?
Oh, God, it was unbelievable.
Thank God for iPods.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Actually, my other favorite stories with Guy is when Guy and I went on the road. Guy, you're one of my people. Don't stop that. Went on the road. We went out to on instructions from Steve to tell Mitch Kapoor, Fred Gibbons, and Bill Gates that we were getting in the applications business. Remember this? And when they could finish stopping laughing at us. I thought the last one with Gates was particularly poignant. I think he was actually the most pissed, as I recall. Yeah. Mitch was a gentleman. Fred was very nice, and Bill was just pissed, as I recall.
That was the triad. Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But a lot of people forget that those guys were at the launch.
Oh yeah,
all three of those guys were there.
They were in Hawaii too.
Yeah, they were in Hawaii.
So there was a time when we were right after the official launch in January of '84. We were going around the country introducing the product to dealers and doing dealer training and so forth. And Steve and I and some others were in Toronto, Canada. We had a truck full of Macs and other equipment, and we had to drive from Toronto down into Detroit, and we're going through customs there, U.S. customs, and this really kind of rough customs guy wanted to know what was in the truck. And we say, I mean, it might have even been before the launch. I think it was. It was before the launch.
The road shows before.
Yeah. And we kind of mumble computers because we're not supposed to talk about what we really have. It was before the launch. And this guy's giving us a hard time. And all of a sudden his demeanor changes because we say we're from Apple Computer, and he whispers, is it the Macintosh? And it's just very late at night, as I recall, and we kind of go, yeah? And he goes, beat IBM. Sends us through. Anybody remember anything about the dating game in Hawaii?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Was
What do you
Bill
remember
and
about
Mitch
that?
and...
What was the setup there?
Well, they were... as I recall, I believe it was deciding... But go ahead, you remember, I'm sure.
I wasn't there. I was working. Mike was in Hawaii.
Oh,
I wasn't there either. I had some reason I wasn't
No,
at that.
Barbara and I were there. Barbara
Well, they
actually,
run stools like in the regular dating game, and I can't remember much more.
No, Barbara was the one that was actually training them for this. Because the way it was supposed to happen was that they were supposed to be on stage, and then it was going to be software developer number one. The Macintosh is of course, the gorgeous blonde that's picking the developers that she's going to be comfortable with. So,
We don't have that on tape, though, I don't think.
no. The three developers, the three bachelors, because I mean, this is so passé, God only knows. Do you guys remember the dating game? This was an old game where three bachelors would appear and a girl would start asking them questions. But anyway, so they were all introduced, and Barbara, the night before, 3 o'clock in the morning, was there. No, you say this, and no, you say that to these three giants of the software industry, and Barbara apparently, but she was bossing them around. And then the Steve, when he presented them, I mean, the audience went completely wild because, well, first of all, you didn't see what happened here after this. Not only these salespeople were like completely nuts for about 10 minutes. We couldn't restart the program. They just went absolutely fanatically nuts. And then at that dating game was another case where they were just going crazy because here were the three biggest names in third-party community saying that they were endorsing the Macintosh. Now, of course, the unfortunate part about it, and this was. Somebody must remember the meetings with Lotus. Do you remember the meeting? Yeah, you must have. You were there. You were the one that initiated them. Yes.
Yeah.
Because they unfortunately made a half-baked product because they were afraid to compete with their product on the. Oh, you were there, Rick. You actually were working for them for a while. Yeah.
Well, in fairness, I think they were trying really hard. It just didn't work.
No, they explicitly said they didn't want to compete with the product on the IBM.
They did a different product. I actually went and met with Mitch Kapoor in 1982, and he showed me Lotus 123 long before it was released, and it looked just like VisiCalc. At the time, I was so excited about the mouse and menus and all that, and Lotus 123 didn't have any of that stuff. It was just a really fast VisiCalc with charts. So we told Mitch that we didn't really want 123, but if he could do a personal finance package, we would be interested. So a little bit later, 123 was released. Mitch became a centimillionaire. We all got religion, and then they worked on Jazz. And by that time, a guy named Jim Manzi was the CEO of Lotus. And Jim Manzi swears that they shipped 10,000 copies of Jazz, it was called, and got 15,000 returns. It wasn't their best product. It was ambitious, though. It was ambitious.
Yeah, it was ambitious.
I remember it must have been maybe December of 1984 or thereabouts. Steve had been in New York where he purchased an apartment, and he came back, and he'd just been to a Christmas party of Andy Warhol's. And I apparently missed that one. And he'd met Mick Jagger at Andy Warhol's Christmas party, and Mick apparently wanted a Macintosh. So we immediately created the Mac for Mick program. And Andy, I think you came, didn't you?
No, I was invited, but I was busy working on the software.
Well, thank you.
Jane, you were there. You were there, weren't you? You went to this meeting, didn't you?
Who
No?
came with me? Steve and me and Bill Atkinson. Is he the one who came? So we're super busy, but we got to hop on the plane and fly to New York with this Mac for Mick, and I always got it confused. Was it a Mac for Mick or a Mick for Mac? And we take the limo, because when we flew with Steve, we always flew first class and had limos, and we go to Mick Jagger's brownstone. And I remember this distinctly. You know, we knock on the door, and these two great big thugs open the door. And, you know, is Mick there? And it's a narrow brownstone, so they usher us up to like the third floor. And here's his daughter, who would have been who, for those of you who read People magazine. This was
Jade.
1984, so. Jade, daughter of Bianca? Yeah, okay, good. And she's about 12 years old or so, and she's hanging out with her dad for the weekend. And here's this rock, you know, what's a rock star do on the weekend? Well, he's got jeans on and a T-shirt, and he's just kind of hanging out. And my recollection was that he didn't know why we were there. And he had no interest in this computer. So Atkinson sets it up for Jade and teaches her how to use the mouse. And Steve and I attempt to have a conversation. I remember two things. Really large lips and very slurred speech. That was the Mac for Mick.
No, that was the beginning of the Celebrities Can't Wait.
I forgot about that.
Yes, there was a celebrities campaign, and Michael Jackson ended up with one too.
Yes,
Yeah.
because he had done the Kids Can't Wait. So we then had the Celebrities Can't Wait.
To, you know, Michael Jackson, and I think we want that one back anyway.
Wasn't there one for Stevie Wonder?
Herbie Hancock.
No, there was one for Stevie Wonder. Wasn't there one? And they said, but Andy, do you remember?
You didn't
this?
like the color.
Chris,
Yes, Chris.
You remember?
Fact or fiction?
I don't recall the actual numbers, but if you look in the 1985 annual report, you'll see 7 or 8 from politicians, business people, beautiful duotone black and white photographs on one page of the person, and then their artifact created on an image writer 72 DPI cloth ribbon dot matrix printer. But my favorite one, which is in the possession of the Computer Museum, was one we could not print. It was Gary Trudeau's. And it was savaging the Reagan administration. And I kept a copy of that, and it is in the Computer Museum's collection.
Mike, I think you should ask us who still uses Macs.
All right, panel. Who still uses a Mac? How many Macs do you have at home?
One. Okay.
One. Good.
Sorry.
We have 2.
You have 2?
My husband says, Rand says, we have 2. He has one and my daughter has one. And we're about to buy my son one, but I unfortunately have to use the other kind because I'm in business.
All of a sudden, she's off the dais. Yeah,
At least I didn't go to work for Microsoft.
Get that one word just thrown to the crowd, you know?
That's why PR is internal now.
I think Mr. Boych is a long-term Mac user.
No, I will say that, you know, so after Apple, I started a company, Radius, which was a big manufacturer of Apple-related hardware. And then after that, I got a little disillusioned, and so I owned 0 for a while, and now we own 5, and we're a family of 3. So somebody earlier told me, I guess that's whatever that is, 166% market share.
I have an iPod. I love my iPod.
I've donated a bunch. How's that?
That's great. So here's another sample of what was going on at the time. I think this was in probably, I don't know the exact date, April, May, June of '84. The Mac was on the marketplace, out in the market, and we were concerned that we weren't getting the penetration in the business market that we'd hoped, some of us hoped we might be able to get. So we hold a very standard focus group in New York, where we brought in a bunch of people who all use IBM PCs in their business job, and they have there's a moderator sitting there, so there's about 8 people with the moderator, and we're all behind this special mirror. And we can hear them, we can see them, we can make fun of them. They cannot do the same to us because it's this special coating on the mirror. So it's set up so there's a Macintosh and an IBM PC, and the moderator gets them talking, and they're visiting and so forth. So then she says, well, why don't you come over here and write a memo on the PC like you do at work, and just a real short one, so that each person does that. Now, why don't you come over here and try this on this computer called a Macintosh? None of them have ever seen a Mac before. That was one of the criteria. And then they do something else, and they do a few different exercises. They go back in the middle of the room and sit down, and the moderator says, now, which of these 2 computers was easier to use? And all of them, oh, the Macintosh. It's just amazing. Okay? Which one do you think would give you better personal productivity? Because that was a big thing we harped on, personal productivity in the office. Oh, the Macintosh by far. Which one would you recommend to your friends and to your family and to your coworkers? Everyone, the Macintosh. And we're sitting, I don't know if any of you were with me, maybe Barb was. We're in the back of this focus just giving each other high fives and say it's just a matter of minutes before we take over the marketplace. And then she asks the $99 question, the important question, the real question, which was, if you had purchasing authority in your company for purchasing computers, which of these 2 computers would you purchase? Oh, the IBM, oh, the IBM, oh, the IBM. And we're sitting there seriously going, what's a mother to do? They love our product. They truly love our... I remember the computers were set right in front of the glass panel. And there's this one... in the old days, I thought she was an older woman. Now she's probably younger than me. And she's touching a mouse for the first time. And she's kind of reaching down, and she grabs it, and she moves it, and sees the cursor move on the screen. And she has this physical reaction. And she's like this, and she moves it, and it's just really fun for her. And you see the elation in their faces. So it's what we all thought the Mac was supposed to be. And then say, well, which one? If you were in charge of purchasing, it's IBM. And we didn't know what to do. We truly didn't know what to do. It's one of the hardest marketing problems we've ever faced in our lives. And I think at that time is when we started planting a lot of seeds, and one of the lucky seeds that got planted was in the area of developing the laser printer. And I don't know if any of you have stories related to how that got going, because in many ways that saved us for quite a while in terms of revenue.
Yeah, I think Bob Belleville gets some credit for that one. Mm-hmm. He was an ex-Xerox guy, and he knew John Warnock and Chuck Geschke. And there was, we were talking about this downstairs, there was kind of the inside description of the laser writer for a while. So the laser writer was going to cost $7,500 when it was introduced, and it took about a minute and a half or maybe 5 minutes to spit out a page. So for a while they were calling it the Lisa without a screen. But long term, it definitely turned out to be the right thing. Made a huge difference.
What other things as you think about what helped the Mac survive and not run out of gas come to mind as you think about that first year being in the market and things that we did in the marketing end of deals?
Well, I think that we were, pretty innovative, and even when we failed, one of the things we worked on was that famous Test Drive the Macintosh campaign. Remember that? I got the phone call to come over and do the fall promotion. I think he called in August. Fall promotion is usually a plan like in February, but we had to put together this.
You had 3 weeks.
Yeah, exactly. It was
change Christmas.
Yeah, there you go. Or everybody could just go Hanukkah. No, but it was a very innovative campaign. It was Steve's idea. It was something. It was a novel thing. Have people go to the computer stores and take computers home. That was like really a great thing. Now. Did it work? No. It drove the dealers crazy. But it was voted by Advertising Age as one of the top 10 promotions in 1984. And that alone got us a lot of press, and I'm sure made people more aware of us. But we were willing to try new things like that, even though it didn't necessarily work. And there was a sense of daring in the organization that was, I think, instrumental in keeping it alive.
Well, one of the inherent, I think, conflicts with all of this is that I think positioning-wise, we wanted to position it as a business computer because that, I think, was where everybody saw the market was. But yet the sort of slogan was the computer for the rest of us, and then the test drive a Macintosh, take it home and see how it works. While at the same time, the Apple IIc had just been launched, and you guys were running an ad campaign where a little Apple IIc was running an entire office building that was like 50 stories high. Remember that? And I think these are the kinds of things that create confusion in the marketplace. But what the Mac really did is it enabled people to have a relationship with their computers. And I think to this day, that marketplace is really what drives Apple. And it's an incredible thing. I mean, you really love your computer when it's a Macintosh.
It's worth talking for a minute. Yeah. Comment? Question? Can we get a microphone here?
Hi. Actually, I've got two questions. One is just I know the main focus is on the ads, but you did mention software and that there wasn't any compiler for the machine and so on. And you mentioned Bill Atkinson, and I just wanted to mention that I've always wanted to meet Bill Atkinson because his program for MacDraw really blew me away, almost more than any other program I'd ever seen. And so I wonder if the source code for that program still exists and so on. But my question about marketing was for the graphics community because the Mac was rather quickly adopted by the designers and I was wondering if that was just because they learned about it themselves or if you had some special way of getting to them.
Any thoughts on that?
Oh, we should let John Skull explain.
Yeah.
Mr. Desktop Publishing is here.
Yeah. He is here. He was there. Where is he?
Is there?
He could stand up.
I mean, any particular area of desktop publishing that people would like to know?
How did we consider it to be a market, and what do you recall about what we're going after and what our expectations were?
Well, it was kind of an interesting story. We, as you know, in the middle of 1985, Steve and John had their little tiff, and Steve went into exile, and the company basically got changed radically. There's no longer a Mac division. We had a education group, a consumer group, and a business group. And some of us were put in the business group. Not exactly sure why. Some of us went to different places, but we did. And I was given the opportunity. Actually, Barbara probably should have done it. Barb Colkin, who had been in charge of product marketing in the Mac group, but she, I think, chose to leave the company and expand her horizons. I stayed and was asked to figure out how to get this laser writer to actually be a successful product. And so I think Regis probably gets a lot of credit for thinking that there ought to be something focused on the graphic arts, publishing or something. So I took it over with a summer intern who thought he was going to be doing something in the education market, but instead he worked with me trying to figure out what we were doing. So we looked at it very quickly, probably spent about 6 weeks, to be honest, in the summer of '85. And we're fortunate that Aldous and 2 other companies that you don't know about, because they ended up not having the better product, and Aldous was the one that we thought had the better product. We're in beta or an alpha, actually, of a page layout product. So I brought in the Stanford Publishing Group. They have a course. We brought them onto campus and showed them this prototype of page layout. And kind of like Mike had that, that wow, they get it. We did that 2 sessions one day, and people were just completely blown away that there was this thing that could print out something that you previously had to do with cutting and pasting, for those of you in that business, or know anything about the old way that people did layout. And it just was clear that we had something extraordinarily special. So we did a real quick who would like it. I didn't know diddly about publishing. I'd been fortunate to be in marketing and done a lot of stuff with the ad agencies and things, so I kind of got it. But it was like, 90 hours a week for the next year and a half, trying to become an expert of something that I wasn't an expert of. And, a year and a half later, kind of knew something about it. But we thought we had something special. We thought we had an opportunity to be the Trojan horse that would get Apple into business, even though we started by not corporate America, but going after small business, graphic artists, people who would pay $10,000 for something because it'd pay for itself in about a month and a half. And so, in the business world, ROI is everything, and this was like, it was no longer just a toy that could do really cool stuff. It's something that you, as a small businessman, could just, take over. So we did it. I remember going with Bill Campbell, who was, if those that know Bill, he had been at Kodak. We went and tried to convince Kodak to be, a strategic alliance. They did the same thing that, that Steve's little video did. They looked at it and said, this toy, this is ridiculous. I went to every major publishing thing. They all said it was a toy. So we stayed pretty much just with small business, and kind of, in a lot of ways, the rest is history. We had the luck that Xerox, because we didn't have any money, it was me and a summer intern, and we were really, the rest of our business marketing was focused kind of on more what you think of as mainstream business marketing, and we kind of did this renegade thing with the blessing of, my boss at the time, John Zeichler, and then Bill Campbell and Scully. They all said, yeah, if you want to go try it, go do it. But we very quickly got the sales organization. They wanted something desperately to sell into business, and this was something they did, and it just kind of took off like a rocket. And then it's just a matter of grabbing onto the tail and just kind of letting it go, and hopefully kind of not letting the flood go out and kill people, but instead go somewhere. And that's my job, was just kind of to usher that. So it was a pretty fascinating 3.5 years after that, and I did it it was just the most amazing time of my life, actually. So,
thanks, John. I'd like to focus for a moment also on another program that I thought was extraordinarily well executed. We, I think Joanna or Barbara, hired a consultant to help us understand the education market. Who hired this? We hired this woman.
Oh, yes.
Who hired her? Joanna did, yeah. So we thought there might be a market in the high-end education marketplace, so we hired a consultant to tell us about it, and she gave us a report describing the size of the market and so forth, and the only word I remembered in that report was the word consortium. And what I learned is that educators in colleges really like that word a lot. They like being parts of consortiums. And then, I don't know if we'd hired Daniel yet or not, but right around that time frame, we hired Daniel Lewin, and we wanted to go out and find a number of colleges that would sign up to buy some Macintoshes, because colleges had never purchased PCs in quantity, ever. They had a few here and a few there, but they never placed an order for a large number. And we had this hunch that if we could get 10 leading colleges in America to each pre-order 1,000 Macintoshes before the launch, and then we'd be able to package this somewhat artificially, but nevertheless we would, as the Apple University Consortium, that we'd be on to something. Now, there's something in your compensation package that probably should be brought forth at this time, if you can remember it. I kind of remember it. And it had something to do with first-class travel and needing to go on a vacation with your wife or something. What was that? And why don't you stand up and tell us about that, and also tell us about anything you remember about setting up the consortium and some of your fun experiences there, because that was a pretty amazing time.
Thanks, Mike.
This is Daniel Lewin.
Okay, so Joanna's, it was her idea. And Carolyn was a consultant. She was at the University of Michigan. And Joanna had recruited me for 6 or more months to sort of come and play in the group when I was working on the corporate presentation side of the Lisa stuff. And so I said, I'll investigate. So I went over and sat down and watched what was going on. Carolyn was there, and you guys had Stevens Institute in for a visit, Mike and Joanna. And so after I saw what they were doing, I said, I'll come under 3 conditions. A, I get to undo everything that you've done. B, Steve helps, but only when I ask. And the third one did have to do with some other things.
Yeah.
And which I could go into, but maybe I won't. And so the good news is 2 out of 3 isn't bad. I did undo everything more or less that was done and reconfigure it. Steve helped, and only when I asked, and that was a visit to Brown, because that's the only deal that he was involved in at all. Mike helped me a lot, as did a few others. And so the essence of it was the core that Mike said with going after 10 schools, which we accomplished pretty quickly, and the deal was $2 million worth of product each at $1,000 a machine. A commitment with no penalties for not meeting the commitment. A commitment to get the faculty involved, but of course you can't get the faculty to do anything that they don't want to do, so that was just the carrot. And then at the end of the day, the project slipped, and so the 10 became 24, because we decided that 24 would be the right number. And it became kind of one of each kind, if you will. We had a small liberal arts school, we had some historically black colleges, we had lots of stuff organized into that. And at the end of the day, the most exciting thing was the University of Texas handing us a $32 million purchase order before we shipped, which we fulfilled over time. We certainly didn't have the inventory when we shipped. But there were 89,000 Macintoshes shipped into the university community in 90 days after the dealer community saturated, which was about 4 or 5 months after we launched, before test drive. So anyway, those are my recollections. Or other things you want to know, I'll be glad to talk about.
That's great.
Okay.
And what some thoughts, some things I remember of that too is when we announced the original consortium, it had, instead of 10, we got I think 12, including, so there was Harvard and Stanford and MIT and Michigan and all of them and Drexel.
Or Reed College.
Drexel. I hope I didn't offend any Drexel alums here.
The Drexel was the first in line. These guys were great, and they.
You know where Drexel is?
It's in Philadelphia.
Yes, good.
It's across the street from Penn, and they committed in a huge way. We silk screened a D on the front of their machines. Remember that?
No,
It's special in the factory, so there's a little silk screen of Drexel D on the front of every machine. And they did extraordinary things with the equipment. But the really interesting thing was that before I joined the group, there was a deal between Microsoft and Apple, and we had the publishing rights to Multiplan, Word, and File from Microsoft. Apple did. And we undid that a little bit after, and we had a commitment to Drexel to deliver those products as part of the bundle. So that was a pretty big PO that we cut to buy those products for Drexel. They made a huge commitment. So a lot of the schools did extraordinary things and obviously spawned the whole class of developers that came out to do great things. Mike came with me on a lot of those things, and we got a lot of the CS departments to kind of dink around with the ROM a little bit and figure out there was really no OS in there, but they could do interesting things nonetheless. And the Dartmouth campus was probably the most interesting one, where they committed to put Mac wherever there was a pillow or a chair, and because they'd invented more or less time sharing there on the Honeywell mainframes along with BASIC, they told digital to go away and take the rainbows and go home. Told them to take the peanuts, the juniors, and go home. And they made the kids buy, the financial aid where appropriate, Macs. And Martin and Mike sat with a couple of Dartmouth folks in a dorm room the day we distributed them. And they wrote their own protocols before Apple Talk existed and booted up 3,000 Macintoshes on that campus within a couple of hours of distributing them. All these kids plugged in, hit the central time sharing system, were playing games, a Star Wars game or something online. But these guys helped them figure out how to write, Martin and Mike, how to write their own protocols using the unshielded existing phone wire. They did amazing things in real time with a really great group of people back in process to sell other than to a dealer. And so we enabled universities to do themselves what dealers did for end users, and that was a breakthrough because IBM back were forced to pay maintenance fee rates, $200 an hour to move computers from one room to another because it was really mini computer days. And we were saying, take care of yourself, fix them yourself. So, and they bought it.
Get an absolute tremendous response in the college market when they sensed that there was a movement. No one wanted to be left behind, so Daniel's phone was literally ringing off the hook from hundreds of colleges wanting to join this consortium program, and it brought a tremendous amount of revenue into the company. And we and I remember being in Texas at Austin when we received their delivery of 1,000 or 2,000 Macs, and they were just marked at the museum. And it was just chaos. It was so exciting because colleges had never seen so many computers at one time. We assumed that IBM would have some kind of response some point in time, and I don't know how soon after it was, but I do remember reading a little article in Wall Street Journal, the New York Times. This is a little article saying IBM announces the creation of a college sales division. Do you remember this? And staffed with 400 people. Yeah, Daniel. True story. Yeah.
I had a similar story actually on the international side because we localized Macintoshes after we shipped in the U.S. We shipped fully localized systems into the major markets in Europe, and we launched a major program for the Japanese market. And by that time, the PC had been out in the market for a while. Of course, we didn't have any of this, and we were doing this very much as a shoestring operation. As a matter of fact, we realized it to the level that even when you open the case, the warnings inside were in major languages of the world. About a year afterwards, we were taking apart the PC, and we saw exactly the same wording, the same font, and everything inside their PC. So they couldn't have taken apart Macintosh, and they couldn't quite get the software level of localization which we were able to do thanks to Bruce Horton's fundamental architecture in the software. But they could do it in hardware, so they literally copied the font and everything else to my but what's interesting that the guy isn't mentioning is that when we first shipped Macintosh, we weren't really a resounding success in the business market. We kept making up little markets. I have actually a document of like the very small business market we had there. We could try to estimate the size of that market. And what was interesting is that we were selling, but we weren't selling where I thought we should be selling. We were selling to developers, and actually, in your organization, developed a Dell model of selling to the world long before Dell had come up with that model. They were ordering online, they were custom shipping them product, configuring this to a large number of developers.
And we're selling them leases.
Nobody was.
I sold leases in America. I'm very ashamed of that.
So this was, we were shipping into the education market and into the developer market and internationally. And we were just not cracking the business nut. But meanwhile, that was able to sustain us the laser writer and the whole...
Joanna, isn't that when Mike Murray invented the term diagonal marketing? That was yours. Diagonal marketing.
After knowledge workers, I guess.
Yeah. Which was after Macintosh Office.
We invented a lot of our own market research.
Oh, yeah.
It's cheaper that way.
Back on international, I have this authentic Exhibit A memo that I kept. And actually, when I went to Microsoft, all my Apple papers got confiscated. I received a subpoena back in 1989 when the two companies it wasn't from Apple, it was from Microsoft subpoenas me. I'm their own employee. And they took 3 or 4 boxes of prized possessions, including Jeff Raskin's original papers that I stumbled upon. I don't know if they ever came back. This I got a memo in before the Mac was launched from Steve Jobs to Tom Lawrence. We're running Apple Europe, and carbon copied are Mike Markula, Barry Cash, Joanna Hoffman, Mike Deutsch, and Mike Murray from Steve. And this is these two guys who are running Apple Europe. He's asking for their sales forecast. How many Macs are going to sell in the first year, because we needed to have an international product. And it says, based on your second half forecast of only 2,700 units, I have canceled all plans and efforts for a European Macintosh. It's not worth it. Please advise of any future forecast updates. Thanks, Steve Jobs. Now you've got to remember, Steve was the general manager of the Macintosh division. He was also chairman of the company. So those guys had just been sent their death sentence.
I was managing international at that time, and when they sent forecasts, I looked at them and I thought, oh, this isn't going to fly, because of course we were shipping 1 million in the first few months on paper. We were shipping 1 million in the U.S., and they were saying they were actually had real numbers, you know, this month and 2,800, whereas we had, you know, orders of magnitude more. So this was a major blow up, and I just knew this was. As soon as this went to them, they called in panic, saying, "Say multiply by 100 and send it back."
Well, we were always great on the forecasting side. I remember my first forecasting meeting with Ed Colby. Is Ed here? Ed here? Ed, I loved Ed. He was like this great guy. And I would go in and he'd say, "Well, Steve, how many do you think you're going to sell?" And it's like, "I think this number, Ed." And I said, "I was expecting there to be more to it." And he said, "Well, nope, that's it. That's it. That's the entire forecasting meeting. Just give me your number." And they said, "Ed, isn't there any scientific, like, you know, anything behind anything?" He said, "No. Just give me your number." Okay.
Yeah.
In early 90 or 82, when Mike came on board, we started having, or maybe we already had by then, we were working closely, particularly with software developers, particularly Microsoft. And it might be interesting for you to talk a little bit about working with Microsoft and your interactions with Bill Gates and the team there, and if anything comes to mind that'd be fun to hear about.
Yeah, it was interesting. So Steve had already reached a handshake deal with them, I guess, before I arrived, to do applications. And the original vision of the Macintosh was it was going to be a very simple product that was going to have 3 or 4 applications. And I think Steve even, for a while, liked the idea of having all those applications be in ROM, along with the operating system. And so the idea was Microsoft would do these applications, maybe we would bundle them, which didn't leave a lot of room for this flowering third-party software industry. But I remember going up there for the first time with, you know, Andy and Bill Atkinson and a few other people. And I remember Andy in particular saying, you know, this amazing program. And we were walking through the airport at Seattle. He goes, "This is going to be great. I've never been to a real software company before." And Microsoft at the time was had 300 employees. And they were in about a 10,000 square foot building in Bellevue. I found an old letter from Bill Gates to Steve tonight, but I forgot to bring it with me, but where Bill was basically beating us up because we'd given some Macs to software publishing, Fred Gibbons and company. And Bill didn't think that was consistent with our agreement. Only Microsoft should be able to do productivity apps. And he said to Steve, "You know, the Mac is light years ahead of everything else out there. It's the most innovative. I can't wait until we can get it to market so we can pass all the other less innovative computers by." So,
now, if I'm not mistaken, did Microsoft devote about 30% of their development resources to the Mac at that period of time?
I mean, they had some really talented people. You know, Charles Simonyi was kind of the first high-powered computer science type guy that they brought in from Xerox, and they did those apps like Word, for example. I think on the Mac first. Certainly, they did the spreadsheet on the Mac first. There was an original spreadsheet called Multiplan, which I guess had shipped for DOS and then was redone with GUI for Macintosh. And then when they did Excel for the Mac only initially. So they certainly did make a reasonable investment. There's another meeting I remember that was Andy recently wrote about on his website, and was in the movie. with Noah Wiley, whatever that movie was called, kind of re-portrayed. But we had this meeting where Steve kind of tried to convince Bill. We had quarterly meetings, you and I and Steve and Bob Belleville and Andy, and for Microsoft would be Bill Gates, maybe Steve Ballmer, John Shirley, Jeff Harworth. And so this one meeting, Steve said, was trying to make the point that they really shouldn't even do operating system stuff because it just complicated our relationship, and operating systems weren't really a big business. Certainly the applications business was far larger, which in some sense is true. And Steve said, it's not that I don't trust you, Bill, but it's that, my guys won't trust your guys because they're guys working on operating systems. And so it's not, you can't just say, it's like if your big brother was fighting with my big brother, people wouldn't say the Gateses are fighting with the Jobs. I mean, they wouldn't say your big brother and my big brother are fighting. They'd say the Gates family and the Job family are fighting. And, Bill, without really being too perturbed, said, well, no, Steve, I think it's more like we had this rich neighbor named Xerox. And you went in to steal the TV set. And you found out that I'd already stolen the TV set. And you would say, hey, that's no fair. I wanted the TV set. Bill was, it was amazing because at the time I was kind of the advocate for third-party software, and I always felt a little bit sorry for Bill because Steve was running the billion-dollar company and Microsoft was a 300-person company. And Bill sort of had a way of, appearing like the underdog. I mean, not appearing all that unreasonable. He did a good job.
I do remember one time where Steve was pretty sure that Microsoft was up to no good, and they were going to take the stuff they had learned from the Mac and create their own product, maybe something called Windows or something. So he calls an emergency meeting, and Bill has to fly down from Redmond to Cupertino, and it was a complete 2-hour yelling fest. And it was Steve doing most of it. And Bill flies back up to Redmond, and when he gets there, he calls me. And he says, what am I supposed to do? Were we just fired? The guy's so hard to work with. Are we supposed to keep going or what? And, of course, Steve was on to something. Bill was and did have other plans to do stuff with graphical user interface, but it was so critical for us to have Microsoft in the camp. So I just remember saying, Bill, just keep doing what you're doing, and we'll figure out how to manage Steve, which... wishful thinking, but it was a very, very fascinating relationship there. I'd like to take 5 to 10 minutes of questions, if there are from the audience, and then we'll have some summary comments. And we'll try to get the microphone, too, if we can. How about right back? Yeah, you do very well. Thank you.
Andy, you touched a little bit about something. I don't know if you'll want to say a lot more about this, but the Mac's other competitor, that thing called the 2. How were things there? I mean, I remember hearing a lot of stories about a little bit of jealousies and so on as the 2 continued to sell very well for quite some time afterwards.
Yeah, I'm probably not the best person to talk about that. I'd like to turn that over to one of you guys. I mean, when I worked with Apple, when Jane and I were there, we really primarily worked with the Mac group because that was where Steve was, and that's what we were doing. So I don't know, did one of you guys, Steve, you worked in the Apple II group?
The 2, actually, in truth, in 1989 or 1990, I became director of K-12 marketing, and the 2 was still selling exceedingly well. In 89, it was like astounding. It's like technology, it's like 14, 15 years old, and it's the mainstay of K-12 education still in 1990. So it was, at that point, it had long since reached its apogee, but it was still selling pretty well.
I just do want to say one thing about the Apple II, though. At the Apple IIc launch, again, it was Jane and I, and we decided to split up, and Jane was going to go with Scully and do stuff with him, and I was going to go around with Steve Jobs and do stuff with him at Moscone Center. And this was the day of a big earthquake. I forgot the date of this, but there was a huge earthquake happening. And I'm walking around with Steve, and we're standing, right before the earthquake, we're standing in some booth somewhere, and he starts to tell me about a girlfriend, about some girl that he's dating. And Jane and I already knew about this girl because he had left us at dinner one night for about 2.5 hours to meet her. But anyway, he was telling me about this girl and going on and on and on, and he was very intense in the way that he is. And I'm from Chicago, mind you. I've never seen an earthquake. And all of a sudden, things are rattling all around, and things are falling off of booths, and the floor is shaking, and he's not moving. He's not noticing that this is going on. And I think Well, this happens all the time in California. Because I'd never been here before. So the earthquake is over with. I mean, literally, booths had fallen down. Things were all over the floor. It was all over the news that night. The 2C was nowhere. It was all about the earthquake. I discover later that, in fact, this does not happen all the time in California. Yeah. And it was just an example, yet another example of the intensity of this man to focus on what it was he was focusing on. So it blew me away.
For those of us in the Mac group, there's a question of jealousy. When you're insanely great, you're kind of on top of the hill, so there's no need to be jealous of anything. So I don't think we ever felt jealousy towards any other group at Apple. Maybe a little pity for them at the time.
Yeah,
but never jealousy. More questions? Yes.
It's always fun to see the phenomenal Super Bowl ad and get a feeling for how powerful and groundbreaking it was. When I watched it this week, I thought, I wonder if we could make that in the current era in the political and social climate we're in. And I wonder if any of you have thoughts about that from having been involved in doing it when it was so unique.
I don't have necessarily any thoughts about that, but Mike, you should really tell the story of what happened at the board meeting and the ad, because I'm sure that's not well known, and and then we could perhaps circle back to that question, but.
Some real fast history on the ad. Chiat Day was a brilliant advertising agency that deserves all the credit for the ad. Lee Clow and Steve Hayden and the crew there. And they had come up with this idea in 1983, not for Apple, but they were shopping it to their clients because they had the idea, 1984 is coming up, Big Brother, George Orwell. I wonder, and all good advertising agencies have a car company they do stuff for, a soda company, a high-tech company, so they kind of went to each one, and they came to us with some storyboards that showed this rough idea, and I remember Steve just liking, and I liked it immediately. We said, that is great. And it was the first time that a filmmaker, a movie maker, had been hired to make a commercial, because in those days considered dipping way down and becoming very commercially crass, and they hired Ridley Scott. He went over to London, did the filming. I remember Jay Chiat from Chiat Day went over there, and he sequestered himself behind a whole bunch of cardboard boxes during the filming because he was frightened. Because those guys in the ad who looked like they're skinheads, they were. True story. And he said whenever they'd have breaks in the filming, these guys would all go out and get these glue bags, these bags with glue, and they'd be sniffing glue. And they were truly scary, scary people. So Jay told me afterwards he hid during the filming of this very famous commercial because he was afraid they were going to come and get him. So we get it done, and we just think it's the greatest thing of all time. And it was certainly a generational thing at the time as well. So we're told we need to show it to the board of directors, and Steve's chairman of the board. And I remember very clearly going into the board meeting. We had it on a TV on one of these rolly carts, and we go in and we set it up. And it was Phil Schlein and Mike Markula and Art Rock and
Henry Singleton.
Henry Singleton, yes, and Steve and maybe one or two others. And we show it. And now, this is my memory. Because I expected them, to just go crazy like we had. Phil Schlein has his head down on the desk, on this big boardroom desk, head down, and he's pounding on the desk. Boom, boom, boom. And I think he's got it.
Oh, yeah.
He's with us. That's one vote. And then I think it's Markula turns to Jobs and says, "You really want us to run that?" Nobody said anything. And they're all kind of looking at me and looking at Steve and looking at me. And I'm counting the number of shares I had and the number of shares Steve had. I thought I was finished for sure. And it was such a horrible feeling though, because all of us knew that
I saw you when you came back. It was not pretty.
But we knew it was the epitome of the greatest ad of all time, and we realized there's such a huge disconnect between our board, who were then just a big bunch of schmucks from our point of view, and us. So the board instructed us, because we were going to show it on the Super Bowl, and we'd purchased a 60-second spot and a 30-second spot. And the board says, with no reservations, you must sell the time. So I go back to my office, I call Chiat Day and say, don't ask me why, we got to sell the time. and I'm probably crying actually. And we got to sell it. And they had about a week to sell it, because this was like late December, early January, and there was a deadline. So and their New York office is the media buying department, so they got to sell the time. And there's a Friday deadline at 2 o'clock California time, because that's 5 o'clock New York. The week goes by. I don't want to find out what's going on. It's like planning your own funeral. And the time comes, and it's Friday at 2. The phone rings at Chiat Day saying, we were able to sell the 30-second spot. We could not sell the 60-second spot. I think at the Times then it was like $1 million for the 60 seconds in New York. So we go back, tell Steve that, and Steve talks to the board, and the board says, well then we'll run an Apple II spot. So they went to the vault and looked at them, and there were Apple II TV ads then, but none of them were relevant. So reluctantly, they said, all right, run it.
Is that unbelievable? It's unbelievable.
That's part of the fact part. So then they run it, and the great thing about that is that it's part of the George Lucas strategy. Is we ran it one time for the effect of only running it one time. That's a little gutsy in case you didn't get to see it. You missed it. But then the following night, it was shown on the Super Bowl. The following night on ABC, CBS, and NBC News, and those were the 3 networks then, it was shown as news. Not as advertising, not as PR, but it's Dan Rather and Peter Jennings saying, Apple Computer has introduced a new computer called the Macintosh, and they showed this outrageous ad, and they would show the entire ad in its entirety. So then the next board meeting must be 3 weeks later, and they summon the Mac senior team in there, which is Debbie Coleman and me and Bob Belleville and Steve, and was there another one? I forget. We all go into the boardroom, and they stand up and clap. And that was... Right here. Two more questions.
My name is Dan Henderson. Guy in the mid-'80s who came to Dallas to a Mac World. And you explained to us there the steps of the Macintosh product development cycle. Do you remember step 1?
Step 1 of the Macintosh development cycle, as I recall, is print the T-shirt.
One of the very first things I did with my Mac when I brought it home in September of '84 was to sign on to CompuServe, and it was a big part of my life for a long time. I wonder if the online community, and especially the CompuServe Mac user group, had any visibility in the company, if it made an impact on you guys?
Yeah, I mean, it was a huge impact for us. And I would broaden that. It was not only the CompuServe community, the online community, but the user group community. It's sometimes easy to look back and say that we did all this brilliant marketing and all this brilliant engineering and all that, but there were a lot of early adopters and user groups who put their lives and careers on the line and fell in love with this computer and supported Macintosh when Apple was unable to or unwilling to. And they are a vast population of unsung Macintosh heroes. You'll never know their names because they're all just presidents of little groups and stuff, but that mass of people who believed really sustained Macintosh. And the entire Macintosh community owes something to the user group community. I truly do believe that. So. And you know what? We should introduce Rains Cohen because he was clearly...
Thanks, guy. It was UC Berkeley was a late joining member of the Apple University Consortium, and the campus didn't set up a lot of support for the Mac, so people got together this new user group thing that was coming together. I was just a co-founder. Reese Jones was really the founder of BMUG, who later went on to start Farallon, which became Netopia and so forth. But people started coming together, and it was because of desktop publishing, getting access to one of the first laser writers in the Bay Area, putting out the so-called BMUG newsletter. It was 120 pages, laser printed, and based on the different misspellings of the way our address was printed, and the New York Times mentioned and the InfoWorld mentioned, each one of those was good for 1,000 members and became a 10,000 member international force of the 400-page newsletter twice a year.
Have you changed your shirt since 1984?
On occasion, yeah.
Oh, that is so cruel. How could you say that to him? Oh, God.
I think we're just about out of...
Just curious. Yeah, really. Well, has he?
We're just about out of time. I want to ask the panel two quick questions. No, you're not quick. The first is, how old were you on January 24th, 1984? This will be illustrative. And second, how has your involvement in the Macintosh, or did your involvement in the Macintosh, alter the flow of your life? So, Mike, how old were you? And
I was 29 and 29.95 or something, because my birthday is about a week after that. How did it alter the flow of my life? That's a philosophical question. I mean, the flow of my life kind of continued from there on a pretty coherent path. I did a lot of Macintosh-related things afterward, and definitely don't regret doing it. Wouldn't sign up for Macintosh 2.0 if it were happening again, but it was a great thing to have done.
Joanna?
I was 29 and a half, if we're going to. Well, it was the first job I ever held, really, the Mac, and which meant that I could never hold another job ever again. Primarily because, most companies you have to have certain respect for authority, which my job never prepared me for. And so, no, not because the authority didn't deserve respecting. That's not the reason. It's just that there was a reason why we flew the pirate flag, which is that we just had those kinds of personalities. So the way it altered the course of my life is that I took a lot of risks, joined all kinds of crazy startups. Some were fun, some were not so fun, but I was never able to just do the run-of-the-mill. So
you're ruined forever, in a positive way.
In a great way.
Yeah.
So wouldn't change it for anything in the world.
Shire?
I was the grandfather of the group at 32. I think what I saw in Mac, joining Apple was an incredibly special experience, and being in the Apple II group was really great, but coming to Mac, and therefore, and then after I came to understand that it really is possible to do the impossible, and that's the thing that I most got from the experience. We were hopelessly outnumbered, sort of like there was Daniel and the 400 guys, there was Joanna and, the 300, people at IBM, and we did have a sense that it was possible to do the impossible, and that was a great understanding, going forward in life.
Yeah, I agree with that completely. I just turned 27, and it changed my life in two ways. Number one, I had made this deal with my husband, actually at my request, that we come out to California only for 2 years and then go back to Chicago. And needless to say, I'm still here. And the second thing is, it made my entire career, made my whole life. It completely changed everything. I owe everything to it.
That's a tough act to follow.
Well, we know it didn't have much impact on you, right?
Right. So I was 29 years old when I started when Macintosh shipped. And the bad thing about having worked in the Macintosh division, and I will bet that most Macintosh division employees will sort of echo this sentiment, is that when you've done something like that was so great, it's so hard to find another company or product that can equal or eclipse that. And so many of us, I think we've spent the next 20 years of our life thinking, God, if we could just find something that great again. And it's so difficult. Of course, the only thing worse than that is to have never done it at all. So if you worked at HP your whole life, it made my life, and I am living proof that if you do one thing right in your life, you can live off that reputation for 20 years.
baby. Mike, you going to say what?
So, Mike, you got to answer that question.
I was 28. You know, a lot of things are said about Steve Jobs, and a lot of people have very strong opinions about him. I do too. And one of those strong opinions is that this could never, ever have happened without him. He was an incredibly difficult person to work with at times. And yet, he certainly believed in us. He gave us tremendous creative license and flexibility in the development side and the marketing side. And he galvanized the team in ways that I haven't really seen other people do. I've worked with some brilliant people since that time. But it was an incredibly eclectic group of people and a very spirited group of people. And as you see here, a young group of people doing something surprisingly well in their late 20s, early 30s. It's hard to have that happen in your life. We were very, very fortunate. And for me, as I look back now, and 20 years feels like it was 10 minutes ago, and it's for all of us, it's surprising how quickly time passes, but it was a privilege. I think that's the word I would use. It was a privilege to work for and with Steve.
Yes.
And it was a privilege to associate. You know, I haven't seen some of these people for 18, 19 years. It was a privilege to be with them and to see them here again tonight and see what good people they are and how they're living good lives. So what a great thing we were fortunate to be part of, and how grateful we are that you all would want to come and share this with us tonight. We'll be back in another 20 years.
Not me.
Yeah.
We'll tie that to the old song in the year 2020 or whatever it was. And for those who would like to stick around, I think some of us would be glad to meet you and to talk about things. For those who've had enough, you're welcome to go. For those who stood up and introduced themselves as part of the actual Macintosh team and were Mac employees, we'd love to have you come up afterwards if we could find a camera.
Sure, we can get a picture taken.
And let's get a group photo of that, because that'll be a once-in-a-lifetime deal. So on behalf of our panelists, we'd like to thank all of you. Thanks a lot.
Mike, on behalf of the Computer History Museum, I want to thank you and all your panelists for a wonderful job this evening.